Let me tell you about the day the galactic betting networks learned that statistics, logic, and basic self-preservation mean absolutely nothing when a Deathworlder decides to get involved. Karath the Unmaker stood in the center of the celestial arena, 7 feet of engineered destruction, for arms coiled with muscle that had crushed the spines of 17 consecutive champions. His record was flawless. 532 wins, 0 losses. 0 survivors who could describe what it felt like to be on the receiving end of his attention. The medical bay had stopped pretending to treat his opponents. They'd installed a disposal chute instead. The crowds worshipped him. Beings traveled across 12 star systems to watch 30 seconds of Karath doing what he did best, turning sentient creatures into abstract expressionism. The betting networks had stopped taking wagers on whether he'd win. Instead, they gambled on creative alternatives. How many pieces? Under or over 12 seconds. Would the opponent's species be identifiable afterward? Karath himself had grown so bored with victory that he'd started taking requests. Break the left arm first, they'd scream, and he'd oblige with the casual efficiency of someone folding laundry. His species, the Vorag, evolved on a planet where the local herbivores were armored, venomous, and roughly the size of a space freighter. Naturally, this produced a race that considered extreme violence a form of light entertainment. The arena's holographic displays blazed his stats in glowing, impossible-to-ignore numbers. 532 wins, 0 losses, 0 draws, 0 testimony from anyone who had survived a direct encounter. Then Kalen Vance walked into the registration office. Now, you need to understand something about Celestial Arena registration. The doorways are built for beings who need to duck under starship airlocks. The chairs are reinforced to support entities whose homeworld gravity could liquefy steel. The forms are printed on materials that can withstand plasma fire, nuclear explosions, and really aggressive pen pressure. Kalen Vance was 5 feet 4 inches of what appeared to be the most fragile creature anyone had ever seen.
Pink skin.
No visible armor. No claws. No venom sacs. No wings. He walked up to the registration desk wearing a faded t-shirt that said, "I survived Tuesday" in block letters. Vexer, the six-eyed registration clerk, actually had to lean over his desk to see him. "Small being," Vexer said in the tone one might use with a lost child, "the petting zoo is 3 levels down. This is the death match registration." Kalen looked up with those strange, stalkless human eyes. "I'm here to register for the death matches." The office went silent. Not the silence that happens before violence. The silence that happens when reality itself needs a moment to reboot. Gorak, a massive Centauran warrior registering his son for Junior Division, began laughing, a sound like rocks grinding in a cement mixer. "The little pink thing wants to fight Karath? What's next? Houseplants." But an elderly Regelian named Zephyra, who'd been alive when this galaxy was young, slowly turned her sensory apparatus toward Kalen. "What planet did you say you were from?" "Earth," Kalen replied casually. The office got quiet again.
Different this time.
The kind of quiet that follows someone mentioning that whispered rumor, the death world everyone's been hearing about, where the local fauna hunts in packs, where the weather patterns level cities, where the dominant species apparently considers danger a hobby. Vexer's typing tentacles hovered. "Earth? That's a Class 12 death world, isn't it? Where everything tries to kill you." Kalen shrugged. "We just call it home." And that's when the first smart being in the room realized they might be looking at something far more dangerous than it appeared. Word spread faster than plasma fire in an oxygen recycler. The betting networks, desperate to make Karath fights interesting again, suddenly had the most ridiculous proposition in galactic sports history. A tiny Deathworlder against the undefeated champion. The odds were so astronomically against Kalen that the betting computers crashed 3 times trying to calculate them. 50 million to 1. Several economists suggested betting on the human might technically qualify as a charitable donation. In the champion's preparation chamber, Karath's trainer was having what could generously be called a coaching session. More accurately, an extended period of hysterical laughter. "Your next opponent is shorter than your arm span," the trainer wheezed. "No natural weapons. No armor. from a species that apparently thinks fighting means disagreeing politely. Karoth grunted while lifting weights the size of small buildings. The soft creature will be lucky to survive the opening bell.
I'll make it last.
Give the crowd a show. The other Vorag warriors gathered to offer suggestions. Break its legs first. No, start with the arms. I say we just poke it and see if it falls over. The arena's public address system crackled. Announcer Zix Vorn's voice boomed with theatrical enthusiasm. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient beings. In the red corner, 532 wins, 0 losses, the undisputed champion of the galaxy, Karoth the Unmaker. The crowd's roar shook the foundations. And in the blue corner, weighing in at, well, let's just say not much, from the death world known as Earth, Kalen Vance. The crowd's laughter was immediate. Galaxy-shaking belly laughs at the most ridiculous mismatch in history. But here's what no one noticed. While everyone was laughing and placing bets, Kalen Vance was in his preparation chamber doing something that should have terrified them. He was stretching calmly, methodically, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And he was smiling. The arena floor was a masterpiece of engineered violence. Reinforced combat-grade materials that could withstand orbital bombardment. Energy shields capable of containing a star's fury. Medical drones hovering with equipment designed to scrape what was left of a loser off the floor. Karoth the Unmaker entered first. Champions always enter first. The crowd's reaction was the kind of sound that happens when 50,000 beings simultaneously express approval through coordinated screaming. He raised all 4 arms, his massive frame casting shadows that swallowed light itself. Then Kalen Vance walked onto the arena floor. The crowd's reaction shifted from worship to confused amusement. He looked even smaller against the vast expanse, a single grain of sand on a beach made of titanium and bad intentions. This is going to be over so fast that replay systems won't have time to record it, announcer Zix Vorn gleefully declared. Prepare for the shortest fight in galactic history. The opening bell rang with the sound of impending doom. Karoth charged. Now, when I say charged, understand that this wasn't a casual jog. This was 7 feet of muscle, bone, and concentrated fury moving at speeds that should have been physically impossible. The arena floor shook. Energy barriers flickered from kinetic force. Spectators in the front row instinctively ducked despite enough shielding to stop a battleship. Kalen Vance did something that no one in the arena had ever seen before in response to a Karoth charge. He stepped sideways. Not rolled. Not jumped. Not activated some fancy, defensive technology. He stepped, like someone avoiding a puddle on a rainy day. Karoth's charge carried him straight past Kalen and into the arena wall with an impact that registered on seismic equipment 4 levels down. The crowd went silent. Not horrified.
Processing.
Did he just dodge him? Someone whispered. Must have been luck, another replied. No way he meant to do that. Karoth extracted himself from the wall, shook his head to clear it, and turned with an expression that usually preceded someone becoming a historical footnote. He charged again, more focused, considerably angrier. Kalen moved again. A rolling motion that carried him under Karoth's grasping arms and left the champion swinging at empty air. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Okay, that was definitely not luck. Karoth's third charge was a masterpiece of tactical adjustment. He came in lower, wider sweeps of all 4 arms covering more area, leaving less room for evasion. He'd learned. Adapted. This was why he was champion. Kalen responded by doing something that made several aliens check their drinks for hallucinogens. He ran up Karoth's arm, used his shoulder as a springboard, and landed behind him while the champion was still trying to figure out where he'd gone. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop if pins hadn't been banned after the infamous needle incident of 2387. This is impossible, Karoth's trainer muttered from the champion's corner. He's too small.
Too weak.
Too soft. But Karoth was no longer thinking about impossibility. He was thinking that for the first time in 532 fights, he was actually having to work for victory. And more disturbing, his opponent wasn't just lucky. He was fast. Faster than anything had a right to be. Moving like someone who actually knew what they were doing. The crowd was no longer laughing. They watched with intense focus, the kind that precedes either a miracle or a catastrophe. They were about to get both. The problem with being undefeated for 532 fights is that success breeds a very specific kind of stupidity. Karath had grown so accustomed to opponents who either charged like missiles or cowered in terror that he'd forgotten there might be other approaches to combat. His fighting style had become predictable.
Charge. Grab. Crush. Repeat.
Kalen Vance, on the other hand, had apparently never received the memo about how arena combat was supposed to work. While Karath recalibrated his approach, Kalen was doing something that made the arena's combat analysts frantically check their equipment. He was studying the environment, not the obvious things, weapons racks, power sources. Details no one else had ever bothered to notice. The slight elevation differences in the arena floor, the placement of lighting fixtures, the exact angle of energy barriers, the way the air circulation system created tiny pressure differentials that could be exploited by someone who knew what they were looking for. Is he taking notes? Asked Dr. Vex, the arena's chief medical officer, squinting at holographic displays. He's memorizing the terrain, replied Professor Quindar, a tactical expert brought in for commentary. But that's impossible. No one can process environmental data that quickly under combat stress. Kalen chose that moment to prove them both wrong. Karath charged again. New strategy. All four arms in a coordinated attack pattern that should have been impossible to evade. Kalen waited until the champion was almost on top of him, then dropped to the ground and rolled toward one of the arena's structural support columns. What happened next was like watching a physics lesson delivered by someone with a very twisted sense of humor. Kalen grabbed a loose piece of debris from Karath's earlier wall collision, a chunk of reinforced material about the size of a dinner plate. As Karath's charge carried him past, Kalen hurled it with surgical precision at the base of the support column. The impact created a harmonic resonance that traveled up through the arena's framework into the lighting system above. 3 seconds later, a massive illumination array crashed down directly into Karath's path. He avoided being crushed, barely, by throwing himself sideways into a roll that left him temporarily disoriented and, more importantly, off balance. Kalen was already moving. He'd anticipated the evasion pattern, positioned himself to exploit the vulnerability. But instead of attacking Karath directly, he did something that made the crowd collectively question their understanding of combat physics. He attacked the floor. Using debris as a lever, he pried up a section of reinforced flooring, creating a small but significant depression exactly where Karath would need to plant his feet for his next charge. Like watching someone set a trap for a creature that moved faster than sound and hit harder than a falling asteroid. That's not possible, Karath's trainer whispered. He's thinking 3 moves ahead. 4 moves ahead. He's fighting like he can see the future. But Kalen wasn't seeing the future. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was thinking creatively. This response is AI-generated, for reference only. When Karath launched his next attack, his foot caught in the depression Kalen had created. The stumble lasted only a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Kalen had already calculated the angle of his fall and positioned himself to exploit the compromised balance. He didn't try to overpower the champion. That would have been like trying to arm wrestle a tectonic plate. Instead, he used Karath's own momentum against him, redirecting the charge into another structural element of the arena. The impact was spectacular. Karath hit the barrier support with enough force to crack the energy containment system. Sparks flew. Alarms sounded. Automated safety systems frantically recalibrated to contain the unexpected damage. For the first time in his career, Karath the Unmaker found himself lying on the ground, looking up at an opponent who was still standing. The silence in the arena was so profound that it seemed to have its own gravitational field. 50,000 beings sat in stunned disbelief. She's not just fighting him, Professor Quindar said slowly, his voice barely audible. She's fighting the entire arena. She's turned the environment itself into a weapon. Kalen stood calmly in the center of the combat floor, looking down at Karath with the expression someone might wear while solving an interesting puzzle. That was when the true horror of the situation became clear to everyone watching. He wasn't tired. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even breathing heavily. He was just getting started. Karath hauled himself to his feet with the kind of fury that normally preceded planetary evacuations. His pride had taken more damage than his body, which was saying something considering he'd just been introduced to several immovable objects at high velocity. 532 consecutive victories worth of arrogance transformed into something far more dangerous. Desperation. Enough games, he roared, his voice carrying across the arena like a seismic event. I will end this mockery now. What followed was the kind of berserker charge that had made Karath a legend. Not calculated strategy, pure, unbridled violence at speeds that made his previous efforts look like leisurely strolls. He came at Kalen with all four arms extended, covering every possible escape route, moving with momentum that could have punched through a battleship's hull. Kalen stood perfectly still and watched him come. The crowd held its collective breath. This was it. The moment when reality would reassert itself. The tiny human would be crushed. The champion would remain undefeated. Everyone could go home secure in the knowledge that physics still worked the way it was supposed to. Kalen waited until Karath was exactly 3 feet away. Then he did something that broke several laws of physics and, quite possibly, a few laws of common sense. He jumped straight up. Not sideways. Not backward. Straight up, as if gravity had suddenly decided to take a coffee break. But here's the thing about Deathworld evolution. When your planet's idea of safe includes creatures that can leap 40 feet vertically to catch prey, your species tends to develop some interesting capabilities. Kalen's jump carried him just high enough to clear Karatha's grasping arms. But instead of coming down behind or beside the champion, he landed on him. Specifically, on his shoulders, feet positioned in a way that any chiropractor in the galaxy would recognize as catastrophically dangerous. What happened next violated so many principles of leverage and biomechanics that several physics professors in the audience immediately began questioning their life choices. Kalen used Karatha's own charging momentum combined with his precisely calculated landing position to create a twisting force that a Vorag's spine simply wasn't designed to handle. The sound that followed was like a tree branch snapping, if tree branches were made of reinforced alien bone and had been holding up 700 pounds of muscle. Karath the Unmaker, undefeated champion of the galaxy, hit the arena floor with a sound like a collapsing building. He didn't get up. Kalen landed lightly beside the fallen champion, brushed a piece of debris from his shoulder, and looked up at the crowd with the same casual expression he'd worn throughout the entire fight. Well, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. That was fun. The arena's medical scanners were already confirming what everyone could see. Karatha's spine had been broken in 3 places. Not shattered. Not damaged. Broken with surgical precision, suggesting his opponent had known exactly what she was doing from the very beginning. The betting system crashed first. Not gracefully, with the kind of spectacular failure that happens when computers are asked to process mathematical impossibilities. The odds had been so astronomically against Kalen that the payout calculations caused a cascade failure through the entire galactic gambling network. Then the crowd began to react. Slowly at first, just murmurs of disbelief, but growing into a roar of confusion that shook the arena's foundations. 50,000 beings were simultaneously trying to process what they'd witnessed. Their collective cognitive dissonance created a sound like reality itself having a nervous breakdown. That's impossible. She's too small. She's too weak. She's too soft. But Kalen Vance was standing in the center of the arena, completely uninjured, while the unbeatable champion lay motionless at his feet. Sometimes the universe has a way of making impossibility look remarkably like Tuesday afternoon. The medical teams rushed onto the arena floor, not for Kalen, but for the champion who'd never lost a fight and would never fight again. Dr. Vex barked orders in 3 languages while trying to figure out how someone had broken a Vorag's spine with what appeared to be nothing more than creative jumping. Meanwhile, Kalen was calmly walking toward the exit. A reporter intercepted him before he reached the tunnel. "Miss Vance, how does it feel to be the first being in galactic history to defeat Karath the Unmaker?" Kalen paused, considered the question, and shrugged. He seemed nice. A little predictable, maybe. He glanced toward the exit. Is there somewhere I can get a sandwich? All that jumping made me hungry. The reporter stared. A sandwich? Yeah, something with protein. Maybe pickles. Kalen looked back at the medical team still working on Karath. Should I wait around to see if he's okay? That would be polite. While Kalen discussed lunch options, the arena's administrative offices erupted into chaos. Officials frantically pulled up every piece of information about Earth and its inhabitants. What they discovered made them question every assumption about Deathworld species. Did you know, Vexer said, his voice shaking, that humans evolved from persistence hunters? They literally ran their prey to death across vast distances. That's not the worst part, added Commissioner Thexmol, scrolling through a data pad with growing horror. Their planet is classified as Class 12. The only reason it's not higher is because they haven't found anything more dangerous to classify it against. What's their natural predator? Each other. Apparently. The emergency session that followed lasted 14 hours and resulted in the fastest rule change in galactic sports history. The new regulation, officially titled the Vance Clause, banned all Deathworld species from arena combat on the grounds that it constituted unfair advantage due to evolution on planets that should not exist. Kalen never found out about the ban. He'd already gone home to Earth, where he worked as a gymnastics instructor and considered his brief career as galactic champion to be a pleasant way to spend a weekend. The moral of the story is simple. Never underestimate a species that considers survival a recreational activity. Because somewhere out there on a small blue planet the universe probably should have labeled with warning signs, humans are learning to do impossible things before breakfast. Sleep tight, Galaxy. 3 days after the fight that shattered every record in galactic combat history, Kalen Vance was back on Earth teaching 7-year-olds how to do cartwheels. He had not checked the galactic news networks. He had not read the 17,000 formal requests from aspiring fighters who wanted to test themselves against the human who broke the Unmaker. He had not even looked at his betting winnings, which had accidentally bankrupted 3 small planetary economies. He was eating a sandwich.
Tuna. On rye.
With pickles. Meanwhile, the galaxy was on fire. Karath the Unmaker survived, though his fighting career did not. Medical experts across 12 star systems studied his spinal fractures with a kind of fascination usually reserved for religious artifacts. The human hadn't just broken him. The human had broken him perfectly, 3 clean fractures at precise intervals that would heal without paralysis but would never again withstand combat stress. It was, as one surgeon reluctantly admitted, almost artistic. The Vorag species declared formal grievance. The Galactic Combat Council held emergency hearings. Betting networks rewrote their algorithms to include a new variable previously considered irrelevant, Deathworlder probability adjustment. And somewhere in the depths of the Celestial Arena's administrative archives, a clerk named Vexer made a discovery that should have been made earlier. He pulled up Kalen Vance's registration file and found something strange in the medical history section. Under notable injuries, the human had listed broken left arm 3 times, broken right arm twice, broken ribs 7 separate incidents, fractured skull once, concussions too many to count, torn ACL, left knee, torn MCL, right knee, dislocated shoulders, both recurring, and various stress fractures. Beneath that, in smaller text, most of these occurred during recreational activities. Please do not be alarmed. Vexer read this list 3 times. Then he read it again. Then he quietly submitted his resignation and took up a new career in agricultural planning on a quiet, non-threatening colony world far from any humans. But the story does not end there. Because 9 days after Kalen's victory, a second human arrived at the Celestial Arena. Her name was Jax Mora. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, wore a hoodie with cartoon cats on it, and carried a small bag of what she called trail mix. She registered for the death matches without fanfare. The registration clerk, a newly hired replacement who had not yet learned to fear Deathworlders, processed her paperwork without comment. When she listed Earth as her planet of origin, the clerk nodded and stamped her entry form. The arena's automated systems flagged the file for review, but the review queue was 847 requests deep. No one looked at it for 6 hours. By then, Jax Mora had already fought. Her opponent was a Xylothian by the name of Grashk the Render, a hulking creature with 6 blade-tipped limbs and a reputation for prologuing matches to maximize suffering. He had won 43 consecutive fights and was considered a rising star, destined to one day challenge the ranks of champions. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Not because Jax overpowered him. She didn't. Not because she outmaneuvered him, though she did. The fight lasted 11 seconds because that's how long it took Jax to determine that Grashk's lower left limb had a healed microfracture that made it vulnerable to torsion at a specific angle. She delivered that torsion. Grashk screamed. The fight ended. Afterward, reporters swarmed her. How did you know about the injury? They demanded. Did you study his previous fights? Did you have intelligence from human analysts? Jax finished chewing a handful of trail mix before answering. I'm a physical therapist back home, she said. You can always tell when someone hasn't been doing their rehab exercises properly. His gait was off. She looked at the medical team loading Grashk onto a stretcher. Tell him to ice that joint twice a day. He'll be fine. The arena's executives convened another emergency session. The Vance clause, they realized with growing horror, applied only to registered Deathworlders. Jax had registered, but the clause hadn't been officially enacted yet. The paperwork was still processing. In the ensuing chaos, 12 more humans registered for death matches across 3 different arenas. A construction worker from Nebraska named Dex Thorne. A retired ballerina from Moscow named Sasha Volkova. A 72-year-old grandmother from Osaka named Hana Watanabe, who listed her occupation as gardening and her combat experience as raised 3 children. None of them lost. The Galactic Sports Networks began running segments titled, The Human Problem. Pundits debated whether Deathworlders should be banned from competition entirely. Philosophers argued about the ethics of excluding an entire species based on evolutionary advantage. Economists cried openly about the betting payouts. And on Earth, no one noticed. Kalen Vance finished his sandwich,
Cleaned his table.
went back to teaching cartwheels. But the galaxy had started asking a new question. Not, can humans fight? That had been answered. The new question was far more unsettling. How many of them are there? And somewhere in the celestial arena's observation deck, an old Regelian named Zephyra watched the chaos unfold and smiled. Because she had been around long enough to remember when the galaxy was young. And she recognized something the younger species had forgotten. Deathworlders didn't just win fights. They changed the rules. The crisis peaked 17 days after Kalen Vance's victory. 7 humans had now competed across 4 major arenas. 7 victories. 0 losses. Combined fight time, less than 4 minutes. The galactic combat community was experiencing something it had never experienced before. Existential dread directed at a species that weighed less than most arena entry fees. The Galactic Combat Council convened in emergency session. Representatives from 43 species gathered beneath the vast dome of the council hall, their expressions ranging from bewildered to openly terrified. The agenda had one item: the human question. The evidence is undeniable, declared Counselor Vex, his tentacles trembling. Humans possess no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no flight. By every objective metric, they should be the weakest competitors in galactic history. And yet, he gestured to the holographic displays showing 7 consecutive defeats of elite fighters. And yet, a draconian representative rose, scales bristling. They cheat. They must. No being can defeat a Vorag warrior through physical means alone. They don't defeat through physical means, replied Professor Quindar, who had been called as an expert witness. They defeat through environmental manipulation, psychological warfare, and what appears to be an almost pathological refusal to accept the concept of impossibility. He pulled up footage of Kalen's fight, slowed to 100 speed. Observe. The human doesn't react to the champion's attacks. She reacts to the space between the attacks. She's not fighting the opponent. She's fighting the geometry of the arena itself. A long silence followed. Then the representative from the Xylothian Empire spoke. What do they want? Credits? Territory? Recognition? Every species has an angle. What do humans want? The council turned to the one human in the room, an observer named Ambassador Rachel Chin, who had been sent by Earth's newly formed Office of Galactic Affairs. She had been quietly drinking tea and taking notes for 3 hours. Chin set down her cup. "We don't want anything from you." "Impossible," Vex dismissed. "Every species." "We didn't ask to be here," Chin interrupted, her voice calm. "You brought humans into your arenas. You offered prize money. You placed bets. We're just showing up and doing what we've always done." She paused. "Which is winning?" The council chamber erupted. Accusations flew. Threats were made. Somewhere in the back, someone suggested orbital bombardment as a preventive measure. Ambassador Chin waited for the noise to subside. Then she said 3 words that silenced the room. "We noticed that." She stood, smoothing her jacket. "Earth has no interest in dominating galactic combat. We don't want your titles. We don't want your credits. We have our own competitions at home. They're called the Olympics, the World Cup, and for the truly unhinged, something called competitive eating." She smiled slightly. "Compared to those, your arenas are quaint." "But," she continued, and the room leaned forward, "if you ban humans from competing, you'll have to explain to the galaxy why the species with no advantages was too dangerous to allow in the ring. That explanation will not make your empires look strong." The silence that followed was absolute. Counselor Vex spoke finally, his voice small. "What do you propose?" Ambassador Chin sat back down and picked up her tea. "Leave the rules as they are. Let humans compete if they wish. Most won't. We have other things to do. But the few who do," she gestured to the holographic displays, "will remind your warriors that strength isn't measured in claws or armor. It's measured in what you do when you should have lost but refused to." The council deliberated for 9 hours. In the end, they kept the rules unchanged. But they added a new regulation. Any human wishing to compete must submit a detailed psychological evaluation and sign a waiver acknowledging that their presence may cause existential distress to opponents and spectators. The galaxy called it the Sanity Clause. Humans called it hilarious. Kalen Vance never competed again. He returned to teaching gymnastics, occasionally showing his students the recording of his fight as a lesson in using what you have, not wishing for what you don't. The children were unimpressed. One asked if he could do a backflip. He could. Jax Mora fought twice more before retiring to open a physical therapy clinic for alien athletes. Her waiting list is 3 years long. She accepts payment in rare spices and interesting stories. Dex Thorne, the construction worker from Nebraska, went on an 8-fight winning streak before quitting because he missed his dog. The dog, an elderly beagle named Pancake, had no comment. Sasha Volkova, the retired ballerina, became a galactic celebrity. Her fights were described as violent ballets and murder with grace notes. She used the winnings to fund dance programs for children across 7 worlds. And Hannah Watanabe, the 72-year-old grandmother? She fought once, won in 6 seconds, donated her prize money to an orphanage, and went home to tender tomato plants. When asked why she competed, she said, "My grandson dared me." The galaxy learned something from the brief, terrifying era of human arena combat. Not a military lesson, not a political one. A simple truth. Never underestimate a species that looks at impossible odds and says, "Hold my beer." The celestial arena still operates. Champions still fight. Crowds still roar. But every fighter now knows that somewhere out there on a small blue planet, beings are doing things that should be impossible just because no one told them they couldn't. And sometimes, when the arena is quiet and the crowds have gone home, the old announcers tell stories about the year the humans came. About the Deathworlders who broke the unbreakable. About the kindergarten teacher who made the galaxy rethink everything it knew about strength. They call it the Season of Ashes. But the humans who lived it just call it a Tuesday. Sleep tight, galaxy. The humans aren't looking for a fight. But if you bring one to them, bring your best. Because they will not lose. They simply refuse to learn how. 1 year after the Season of Ashes, the celestial arena had changed. Not physically, The walls still gleamed with reinforced combat materials, the energy barriers still hummed with contained fury, the medical drones still hovered with grim patience. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. A quiet unease. A respectful silence, where once there was arrogant certainty. The betting networks had recovered, though they'd added a new disclaimer to every match involving a Deathworlder. Past performance does not guarantee future existential crises. The odds were no longer 50 million to 1 against humans. They were carefully calculated, heavily analyzed, and still frequently wrong. Because humans kept showing up. Not many. A dozen over the course of a year. But each one brought something new. A firefighter who treated combat like search and rescue. A chess champion who predicted opponents' moves 12 steps ahead. A rock climber who treated the arena walls as a playground rather than a barrier. None of them lost. But none of them stayed either. They fought once, twice, 3 times at most. Then they went home. Back to Earth. Back to ordinary lives. Back to jobs that had nothing to do with breaking alien spines or shattering galactic records. The galaxy couldn't understand it. Why would anyone walk away from fame? From fortune? From the adoration of billions? Ambassador Rachel Chen explained it in a rare interview. You think arena combat is the hardest thing humans can do? You're wrong. The hardest thing humans can do is go home afterward and be normal. To cook dinner. To help with homework. To walk the dog. Any idiot can learn to fight. It takes real strength to put the fight down. Her words were translated into 400 languages. They were discussed in philosophical circles, analyzed in military academies, debated in religious forums. No other species understood. But every human who read them nodded quietly and went back to whatever they were doing. Kalen Vance received a formal invitation to return to the Celestial Arena. The offer included a signing bonus that could purchase a small moon. He declined via postcard. The postcard showed a cartoon cat hanging from a tree branch with the caption, "Hang in there." He added a handwritten note. "Thanks, but I have a class of 7-year-olds who need to learn how to do a proper somersault." Priorities. Karath the Unmaker, now retired from combat, became an unlikely advocate for human rights in galactic sports. His spine healed cleanly, as Kalen had predicted. He walked without assistance. He even laughed about the fight occasionally. "She landed on my shoulders," he would tell interviewers, shaking his head. "Like a small, terrifying bird. And then I was flying. Not in a good way." When asked if he wanted a rematch, he laughed harder. With a human?
No.
Once was educational. Twice would be humiliation. The Galactic Combat Council quietly removed the Vance Clause from consideration. It remained unpassed, unfiled, forgotten. No one wanted to explain to the galaxy why they were afraid of a species that sent kindergarten teachers to fight their champions. And on Earth, life continued. Kalen taught cartwheels. Jax treated sprained ankles. Dex walked his dog. Sasha choreographed ballets. Hannah tended her tomatoes. They didn't think about the arena. They didn't dream about glory. They had already done the impossible thing. Now they did the harder thing. They lived. The last word on the Season of Ashes belongs to an old Rigelian named Zephyra, who sat in the observation deck that first day and watched Kalen Vance step onto the arena floor. She was interviewed for a historical documentary 1 year later. "Everyone asks me what I thought during the fight," she said, her ancient voice crackling like old paper. "They expect me to say, I saw the victory coming, that I recognized something special about the human."
She paused.
I didn't. I saw a small being facing something much larger than itself. I saw what every species sees when they look at impossible odds. She smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that had seen galaxies rise and fall. But here's what I learned that day. Humans don't see impossible odds. They see something else. They see a question. Is that all you've got? And when you answer yes, they smile. Because they've been waiting their whole lives for someone to say that. Not because they want to fight. Because they want to know what happens next. The documentary ended with footage of Kalen Vance, the galactic champion, the unmaker of the unmaker, sitting cross-legged on a gymnasium floor, patiently explaining to a group of children why you should always land with your knees bent. One child raised a hand. Mr. Vance? Is it true you beat up an alien? Kalen shrugged. I didn't beat him up. I just helped him understand something about physics. What kind of physics? The kind where you don't have to be biggest to win. You just have to refuse to lose. The children nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Then they went back to their cartwheels. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a galaxy full of clawed, armored, venomous species updated their strategic manuals. Not with tactics, not with weapons, with a single line of text. If a human smiles before a fight, apologize. Not because you were wrong, because you were about to be. The celestial arena still stands. Champions still fight. But every combatant now knows the truth that Koroth learned on the floor of the arena, looking up at a small pink creature who had just broken him with geometry. Humans don't win because they're stronger. Humans win because they don't know how to stop. And that, more than any weapon, is the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. Sleep well, universe. The humans are home now. But they remember where the arena is.